Welcome to Subramani. It is necessary to reiterate again and again that equities are risky. Why am I doing this? Because I keep getting asked questions. Is it okay to have a only dividend strategy for retirement? Yes, it is good to have a only investment in equity strategy for retirement, provided you have so much equity that you're not worried about a fall in equity markets by 30% for the next 10 years or 12 years. This kind of fall, is it possible? We have no clue. We have not seen markets enough. I mean, 40, 50 years is not enough to be able to judge what will happen next few years. So I'm not willing to take a call on equity markets beyond next 2 years, 3 years at a time. There is going to be dramatic change in the quality of companies which are there. Remember, the top 5 companies in the world do not have any assets, right? Amazon, Alphabet, none of these guys, even Tesla is a car manufacturer, but largely we look at it as a technology company. Amazon is a consumer driven company, but we look at it as a technology company. Similarly for Alphabet, right? So remember that when you are talking of having equity as a dividend, equity dividend as the only source of income. There is another thing which you can do. You can buy an X number of shares. Like say, suppose you have 50,000 shares of Wipro, and 400 rupees is the price of Wipro. Yesterday was 480 or 470, but assuming it is 400 rupees, and you have 50,000 shares, you sell 100 shares every month for meeting your expenses. So next 500 months, which means next 40 years, right, or 42 years, you will have just selling Wipro every month. Is it a good strategy? It is a good strategy, but provided Wipro does well over the next 40 years, we have no clue. Therefore, we create a portfolio. Now, suppose you create one Wipro, one Cholamandalam, one Coromandel International, one Reliance, one HDFC Bank, and create a longish portfolio and think each share is capable of protecting you for 20-30 years. Then you've created a huge amount of wealth. Then you don't, when you created that kind of wealth, you don't sit down and see whether your dividend income is adequate to meet your requirements. Of course it is adequate, right? Unless you have very high expenses. You can't have a very big equity portfolio and be worried about expenses, right? Now the important thing is you've created a good equity portfolio. You still need debt in your portfolio to meet the requirement during bad times. Assuming that you have enough dividend income and dividend income doesn't change, then you may not have to touch your capital for the rest of your life. You may end up leaving all your equity portfolio to your children if it does well over a long period of time. If it doesn't do well, they will still inherit a lesser amount, but you will not have touched the capital. All this is true if you live maybe 20 years. What happens if you live longer? What happens if you live for 40 years or 45 years? You may exhaust some of your money. Equity markets may go through bad times. Some of the shares which you own may drop in value and you may not be able to decide when to sell. Right? So suppose I have Procter and Gamble, I have Hindalco, they've all hit all-time highs yesterday. Does it mean it's a good time to be selling? I don't know, right? So I will not sell at its peak, so I may sell it after some time. So even if I sell say 30 shares of Procter and Gamble, my next 1 year's expenses may be met at 14,000 and odd rupees, right? So you have to decide whether it is enough for you. You have to also have a debt portion, because during bad times, if the market goes through bad times for 10 years, the value of your portfolio could decline, the dividend could also decline. And that is the time when you might panic. And you can't say you did not panic when you were 45 because you were still earning. You might panic at 65 or at 75. You might panic and react exactly how you should not react and how you have never reacted in the last 10, 20, 30 years, right? So all these could happen. So what bonds do is give you some peace of mind, saying in case equity doesn't do well, I have enough money in bond funds to withdraw over the next 5 years, 7 years, preferably 10 years. When you have that comfort, it alters your behavior completely in equity. Now you can have two kinds of equity income. One is equity dividend which you get, and second, the fact that you own an X amount of shares in so many big companies that you can always sell 100 shares of that and meet 1 month's expenses, right? Or even 1 year's expenses. So that worst case scenario is you eat into the capital. It is perfectly all right to eat into your capital somewhere in your 70s or mid 70s to late 70s, assuming you live till 100. After that, you can use equity just as a tadka. You don't need too much of it, just to make sure that your total bond portfolio is not eroded in value by inflation. That much of equity is enough in your portfolio. So see how much equity you need, see how much equity you are comfortable with, and also understand that if you are in direct equity, you will get annual dividends. That dividend will of course be taxable, but you will get dividends with which you will be able to live, right? Till today you were paying dividend tax through the company which was being paid at 28%. Now in your hand you may end up paying lesser dividend tax because you may be at a 20% slab and not at the 28% slab or 25% slab, whatever. So having said all this, it is important that you should have equity in your portfolio and you should have debt in your portfolio. I've done a video saying why you should know your portfolio. The same reason, saying that okay, when equity goes up, how much to withdraw from where, that is something you should know. If debt does badly, you should be able to withdraw from equity. You should say no. There is a reason why we buy risky assets. The reason to buy risky assets is to combat inflation, because in a developing country like India, inflation is a reality. How much is the inflation in India? Effectively, if you want to know, the best way to know is to see how much the dollar depreciates or appreciates against the rupee. So that gap, the amount of depreciation in the rupee against the dollar minus the inflation in the US is the inflation in India. So it could be about 2% real inflation or about 8-9% nominal inflation, where PPF is giving you about 7%. So PPF is a minus 2% kind of return on your portfolio. Is it okay to pursue a strategy of only having equity in your portfolio? Well, I am pursuing that strategy, largely equity oriented, but remember, I still have enough money in debt. In the worst case scenario, I can still withdraw from that. That confidence gives me the ability to sit tight during bad times. So do you need debt in your portfolio? Yes, of course you need debt in your portfolio. Will debt give you yield? Chasing yield in debt does not make any sense. As long as you stick to ultra short bond fund at the highest, and the lowest being liquid fund, savings fund, ultra short bond fund, not going beyond that is enough, but it has to be adequate for you to live for maybe 5-10 years when you do not want to touch your equity portfolio and you're afraid that your dividend yields may fall. So this is the kind of preparation that is needed for you to be investing purely in equity, and this will come only to people who have been investing for very long. For others who see this as a gamble or some temporary thing, for them there is more need for bonds and less need for equity in their portfolio. Thank you.